Alright, so welcome to the studio. Today we're going to hop in and actually work on a number of handles, but before we can do that we need something to put a handle on. So we thought, why not blast you through one of my little cup demos. So we're going to move really quickly through these cups. Okay, nice old loud wheel, so you're going to have to bear with me as I scream into the camera. I always like to start off, get a little bit of moisture right on that wheel. Over the years I've been actually increasing my cup weights, mainly because I like really hot coffee and I kind of love diner cups. Mine are not nearly that thick, but we're going to go for about 1.25 pounds. Obviously we'll start off just by centering. I always raise it up and drop it down about 3 times. Another thing about a lot of the cups that I make is that I like to be able to walk around with them a lot, so I tend to have really wide bottoms in these kind of tapering forms. Open this form up, move that so you can maybe see it a little better. I'm not going to trim the bottom, so I am going to leave about 1/4 inch, maybe a little bit more. Nice wide bottom. I always focus a lot on compression. If you take a class from me, you will be sick of the word compression. Alright, so once we get it nice and centered, we get that bottom compressed, I'm just going to pull that material up and into the middle. Okay, here's where I'll kind of slow my wheel speed down and actually do some throwing. So for me, again, I like to use a lot of slurry, make sure I have enough moisture on the interior and exterior. I'm going to give a little pressure right at the bottom. That'll create a little bit of that groove. My interior, I'm just going to stay as still as possible. My exterior, I'm just going to follow that groove up and into the middle. When I get to the top, I'm just going to pull away rather than pulling right through it. And then always a little bit more compression. Right. So I'm going to get about 3 to 4 pulls most likely. I don't like to oversaturate my clay with moisture. So that's probably where I spend a good amount of my time, is making sure I just have that perfect amount of slurry on the piece. Get a little bit more right from the bottom. Okay. So for me now, this just comes down to shaping. Maybe we'll get a little bit right off that. So what I'm going to do is just trim off any of that excess material that I don't need, which isn't a ton. Remove that. Push that material back up and in. And for this one, I'm just going to put some kind of finger grooves at the bottom. I like to usually start with some thicker grooves and go up into some thinner ones. Again, I'll slow that weight down. I'm going to start off by just pressing my thumb into the form, and then I'll gradually move probably to my pinky. One thing I just want to be cautious of is that I really support the interior as I get these textures on. Okay, maybe I'll switch. Nice little thunk there. Kind of dig that. Very end, I just make sure any of that pooling water I have at the bottom, which I really never have any, but I will always stop any of it out. And then that last little bit is just treating that lip. So I like to have a nice little taper. Sometimes I will just go back right along the bottom and press my tool in just to give it a little bit of that raised lip. Now it just allows glaze to really seep right into that bottom lip. And there we have it. Welcome back to the studio. Today we're going to try to get a handle on handles. All right, back to all seriousness. So I was able to crank out a ton of cups. For me, I never make my cups the same way. I really look at almost every cup as its own individual sculpture and try to really keep pushing myself. Similar to tea bowls, I kind of like having each object be its own, personal idea or thought. So today we're actually going to cover two different ways to make handles. We'll cover ones that are actually pulled right off of the forms, and then we're going to cover ones that are made onto the side and attached separately. So we're going to hop right in on things. Like I said, I do have a variety of shapes all around me that we will be playing around with that will all kind of need some different considerations when it comes to that handle. We'll start off and just grab any size amount of clay, and usually what I like to do is kind of move this into pretty much like an inch thick slab, probably only by about 3 inches wide, and that way I can just cut some slivers off of that to actually make the handles with. We'll toss that back and forth. Again, until I have somewhere around that 1 inch thickness. And some people like making coils, some people just grab chunks of clay, whatever you feel like doing. All right. So now we're going to cut some various sizes. Now, if you don't make handles very often, this is just going to be something that you want to experiment with in terms of how much clay you want for each individual handle. And what I find, even for me, if I haven't made handles in a while, I'm going to be a little bit rusty. So kind of dialing in that minutia is important as I work out series of cups, and you'll get better as time goes on. Even I'm sure by the last cup I finish off tonight, the handle will probably be a lot more fluid than the first one of the day. So I'm going to start off with the handle that we are going to pull right off of the form. So what I want is the exact amount of clay that I want to actually be on the cup. We'll go with this nice wide bottom flared out form. So what I will do to start is rotate and pinch. And for this, I always want a tapered handle. Anytime I'm pulling a handle right off the cup, we want to make sure that it's going from its thickest area to the thinnest area. So I'll start off and give it a little bit of a taper, and then maybe just a little bit of a roll right on the table. From there, I'm just going to tap down the sides so that I can flatten it out. If I wanted it to be a perfectly circular handle, I may not do that. But I like my handles to be kind of flat. They just feel a little bit better. So I will flatten it out, obviously continuing to rotate it on both sides. From there, once I have my tapered form, I'm going to find where I actually want it attached on this cup. So for me, it's probably going to come a little bit higher than the halfway point, and what I'd like it to do is kind of pop back up and curl back around. So I'll start low and go high. Right now I'm just going to mark where I want it to go. I have this little bamboo tool that I really love to use because it's pretty minimal with the markings and it's pretty fluid to be able to draw or sketch with it. And for where the bottom attachment goes, I'm really just guesstimating as far as the height distances. I do know that I always like my handles to be in a straight line. I don't like handles that trail off to the side because I just find that they're very awkward to hold. So once I know their locations, I'll grab a good sharp knife and we'll score all those joints. So I always like to score and make my cross hatches. For cups and forms that are on the thinner side, I go with a really thin knife because I'd like to be deep, but I do not want to start mangling the actual form that I made. All right, and we will score both sides. For the very edge of this, I tend to pinch it just a little bit so that we have some type of a curved form that's really going to match, loosely speaking, the shape of the cup. We will score both sides. And then I will just spritz that with a little water. We will spritz both surfaces. You know, some people really prefer using slurry. I have very distinct rules about when I don't use slurry. If I can get away with it, I like to just use water. That's not always the case, but we'll save that for another video. So I'm just going to give this maybe about 20 or 30 seconds, just so a little bit of slurry actually develops on the surface and it gets just a little bit tacky. We want to make sure that both sides are the slightest bit tacky. And as I do that, what I'm going to do is prepare a bucket of water. And by prepare, I mean get a bucket of water. Usually I like to work it right on the table for demonstration's sake, and sometimes if I want to sit, I actually just open up one of my storage drawers on this work table and wedge my bucket of water right in there. All right. And we will feel both sides there. Time has not elapsed in the sense of any more than it does in real time. It literally happens that quick. That feels great as far as the tackiness. And that feels perfect too. I'm just getting the slightest little bit of transference of slurry. So what I'm going to do is literally push the handle into the cup, and I'm going to give it just these tiny little twists back and forth. All right. Always going to support the interior of the cup as I go to do that. All right. I'll try to make sure that the handle looks level. In other words, that it's not kind of at an angle, so it's level with the lip of the cup. And then once I feel confident about that, I'm going to flip that cup over so that I am looking at the opening. In other words, flip it like that. We are going to let gravity do its thing. In other words, we'll have that handle just going straight down. My goatee. Horrible joke. And then from here, I'm just going to dip my hand in that bucket of water and just slowly start to get it wet. We want to get it nice and slippery or slick. And then I'm just gently going to rub my fingers across it. Always pulling in that downward motion. On occasion, if I feel like I might be loosening my connection that we just made from the handle and the form, I might gently kind of reverse and try to go back up and just recompress that connection point. But generally speaking, from here on out, I just want to slowly get this clay to move down. I'm going to rotate it as much as I can, but I'm really only rotating two sides. The other thing that's really important is just continue to hold your cup in the same direction. If your stabilizing hand or the hand that's holding the cup starts to twist or move, you're going to wind up with a handle that twists and moves as well. So let gravity be your friend and be very liberal with the water. Try to just keep in mind what your end goal is for this handle as far as the thicknesses go. I never want one that's going to be too thin that it hits that point that when I go to fill it with a liquid, it feels like the cup is going to snap. But I also don't want one that's going to be too bulky, that isn't going to be comfortable to hold. So for me, it's that finding that balance. All right, once I have this fully stretched out, which for me that feels pretty good, I tend to just angle it back and flip it over. Get it right onto where I put those initial score marks. Usually the amount of slurry that I have remaining right on that piece of clay from that handle that I pulled is enough to make my connection. So I'll essentially switch my hand so that I have my dry hand, not the hand that was just doused in water, and I will hold that piece and just work that handle into that score mark. Make any of those last little changes on it. Sometimes I even like to let it set up just a little bit more before I give any of those final touches. But that's generally it. So that's round one of just a cup pulled right off the handle. We'll probably pan back for that last little second as we do our finishing moves. So the second kind of handle that we're hoping to make today is one that is almost somewhere in between pulling right off the form and those older traditional methods of pulling off of a large lug of clay. Within this method, we're going to still use just about the exact amount of clay that we're going to need. In other words, very, very little waste. But we're not going to pull it right off of the form. So again, I'm going to cut a decent amount of clay. I never weigh it out, but and I'm essentially just going to start rotating it again. We'll kind of take off those hard edges. From there, I'll give it a couple of rolls right on my table. And this is where we'll start to decide where we want the majority of our material. So just to have maybe a little bit more fun or a little bit more variation, what I'm going to try to do is have the thickest point at the top of the handle where it's connecting with the cup. We'll have it get pretty thin in the middle, and then we'll have it fatten up again right at the bottom. So the way that I'm going to do that is as I roll this against the table, I'm going to make sure that I focus a lot of my rolling right into the middle. And that way we really thin that middle area and preserve those sides. We can always go back to those sides too and just tap them back in and give them a little compression. So what you're going to wind up with is your fat area, the skinny body of the handle, and again, a fattened up area. Okay, from here I'm going to put it back onto the table and again tap it back down. We're going to smooth it over by hand. And again, I'll grab my bucket of water. I just dab my hand in it and I'm just going to taper those edges. And I'm not going to fully saturate the piece, just taper in those side edges. And I'll flip it over and do the same on the side. All right, once we have those edges taken care of, I'm going to grab the top of that handle. A lot of the times I kind of flatten it out just a little bit, just so I don't have to go back and do that later. And then from there, we're going to go back into those pulling methods. So again, giving a lot of moisture, making sure that it's never being worked dry. And you should be careful anytime you have more weight at the bottom of a handle, because gravity is going to do its thing. In other words, wherever your weakest spot or your thinnest spot is on this clay is where it's going to get stretched out thinnest. So where we had made sure that we had less material in the middle, every time I pull, it's going to take more and more material off of the middle rather than stretching it out proportionately. The benefit, though, is that I like having that kind of variation. So once we have enough handle length, which for me that looks pretty good, I'm going to set this piece down on a board to dry, and we're going to give it maybe about an hour or so to set up until it develops a little bit of a skin. We haven't saturated it so much like in a traditional form, but we still have given it a pretty fair amount of moisture. I always like to use a dry board. Right now I'm just going to place it on the table and we'll go grab some pre-made handles from the same technique from earlier. But I really like to try to set whatever angle I would like out of the handle as it dries. So as I place it down, this is where I really like having a dry surface to place it on. I'll place the front end of the handle and place the rest around it. So that way we can really start to make sure that it is setting up and developing that memory for however we want that handle to live on the cup for the future. We'll just pretend like the clock is moving at rapid rates and this is drying, and then all of a sudden magically it turns into that larger handle that we made earlier today. So applying that handle is that next task. So very similar to the other approach, I now have this handle that does have a nice skin, so you can see I can hold it up. It's going to hold its shape, however it's still very malleable. So I'm going to find that spot that I want this handle to live. And really, I'm just going to play around. I don't know why I've been feeling like I should keep making things that are more dramatic. It's kind of weird. But that's what I've been telling myself as I sit down on the wheels. Just be a little bit more drastic, a little bit more over the top. I think sometimes when you're working up close on things, it's really easy to get into the minutia of forms and kind of appreciate that subtle beauty. But then on the same note, there's times where you feel like you need to really make something that's going to stand out. Maybe it's because I'm back on Instagram, where there is that volume and you just start thinking about, man, how do you make that showstopper? How do you kind of have that singular piece that just really stands out? So for me, it's been thinking about being a little bit more dramatic when it comes to the forms and the profiles, and being, something that might stand out from a further distance. Not to say I think it's any better to do that. I don't think it is. I think it's nice to have that full spectrum, but I think that right now when I'm just thinking about connecting with people elsewhere and I don't have that tangible, I don't have people right at my side to talk with or to show things with, it's just a little bit easier at times to be louder when it comes to making work. All right, so I'm just gonna cut out of those sides. I'm just gonna cut some tapered angles. Again, they are just gonna mirror the shape of the cup. Let's look at it and see if you can see that. See how good the camera is. There's a little dog fur right there. Again, I'm going to place that handle on and just give it one final look as to how I'm going to like it. It looks good to me. So again, I'm going to handle that handle gently. This side I already scored, so we'll just give it a nice spritz on both edges. This side I'm going to be as delicate as possible. Again, score both sides. Don't cheap out in your scoring. And a little spritz. So I'll give that about 30-40 seconds to set up. Generally speaking for me, as I make cups, I'm always working in a series of them. So there's never downtime. So generally speaking, as I'd be letting that clay set up and get ready to actually get a handle on, I would pull that next cup over, start prepping that, which usually involves taking the bottom, cleaning it up, if I'm not trimming it, which these wide bottom forms I tend to not like having anything trimmed, so I tend to just get a nice little sponge on the bottom. Sometimes I'll just tap it in just the slightest amount so I just have a really soft little curve. Also makes it nicer on the table. I'll figure out where I think I want that handle going. This is a tough one. Yeah, no, that's it. And then I'll look at the spare handles that I have kicking around. That would be one, for instance. Play with any of these other pre-mades that I cranked out. And just try to identify which one is going to work. I think that's going to be it. Yep. So once I know I have my pair made, I'll set them aside. And most likely, I'm good to go here. Same as before, I'm going to support that interior. I always start with my top connection. Place them and give it just that little quarter turn. Sometimes I will go back and try to do one more pull, like I'll support that side, let gravity do its thing, and just get that last pull if I'm feeling like this form isn't fluid enough. However, I'm not worried about that with this one. I think that we have more than enough movement. So I'm just going to press that bottom in. Almost there. The last little thing that I like to do on these handles, this is my little Bob Ross moment, it's called my happy little handles, is I like to grab that edge and just give it that little bit of a twist on both sides. Right there. And that'll be our little secret.
Anything we don't like, we'll turn it into a happy little tree or something. Because as you know, we don't make mistakes. We just have happy accidents.
Thanks guys, see you soon.